In contemporary cultures, the idea of the family tends to be one of those things that everyone just embraces. The family is the kind of core of support and great values and nurturing and all these things that produce the next generation with good values and all the other things that go attached to families in contemporary cultural discourses. In the Greek materials, sometimes those kind of things show up around the idea of family, but more often what shows up, and especially shows up in tragedy, is something completely different. The family structure is something where people are just kind of on top of one another. It's a highly claustrophobic space in the plays that we're going to be looking at. There's just too much connectedness. They can't quite find space in the world to settle themselves. All this family stuff is stuck on top of them. It's typically not thought of as a supportive, generative, helpful environment. It's thought of as an entangling and nasty one. Quite a contrast, interestingly, with the possibility of families that we saw built into Hesiod's Theogony, where genealogical structures were seen as possibly ordering the whole universe. So a large family tree was a way to bring order out of chaos. And then a very different thing also, even yet another different thing in Homer, where we saw the connection between Penelope and Odysseus as being incredibly powerful, supportive, and nurturing. When we get to Greek tragedy, though, we're going to see a very different approach to the whole concept of family. Something quite different is happening. Now, getting to this story of Agamemnon, which is going to be the first play that we read, looking at Aeschylus's wonderful trilogy, the Oresteia. We're going to read the story of the Agamemnon. This is the first installment of a group of 3 plays that went together in this trilogy form. All of ancient tragedy was, in fact, originally performed this way. We only have one trilogy to survive from antiquity intact, where all 3 plays come together, and this is the Oresteia that we'll be reading for our course. The Agamemnon starts off in a story that tells about the house of Atreus. Atreus' house located here eventually at Mycenae, and I'm going to tell the story of the broader story that leads up to this particular point. We know that Agamemnon is from Mycenae. We hear that in Homer's narratives. We have this strong connection of this hero with this great citadel back then. We've made mention of it up till now. The family, though, that inhabits this great citadel is not quite architecturally sound, the way that their monuments are and the way that their walls are. You'll notice as you're reading Aeschylus's play that he refers to it as Argos. There is another city called Argos. Argos can also refer in a broader geographical sense to the whole region in which both the city of Argos and Mycenae are located. It's likely that what Aeschylus is doing with the term Argos is referring to the whole region. So not changing a tradition so much as giving a slightly different term to a long-standing tradition. Now, hearing the story of the house of Atreus, we have to hear the background story. We know that there's Agamemnon. We know that there are troubles that Agamemnon faces. We learn this in Homer's Odyssey, but we don't quite yet know the full dimension of what these troubles are. The Oresteia is going to help us zero in on what this is all about. We're going to especially look at that scene that Agamemnon kept telling us about in the Odyssey. My wife kills me. Spoiler alert, that's coming up. We're also going to see that there's a very rich and complex tradition that lies behind that. And I wanted to take some time at the beginning here of our treatment of Aeschylus's Agamemnon to talk about the oldest parts of this very complex story. It all starts with a figure called Tantalus. You'll recall from the Odyssey, remember Tantalus in the underworld. He's being punished for all eternity for some horrible crime. We talked about it as a food crime. One of the versions of this awful crime of Tantalus comes out and is connected with the house of Atreus. Tantalus thought it was one day a good idea to take his own son, Pelops, carve him up, and turn him into a stew. So he made a stew out of his own son. The next brilliant idea was that he should invite the gods to have a special dinner with him, ladling out the stew of his own son into the bowls that the gods were going to eat. The gods right away catch wind of what's happening, and they're just disgusted. So they take Tantalus and hurl him into the underworld to be severely punished forever and ever and ever. And they take back out the little pieces of Pelops, get them all sewn back together so that this kid can go on with his life. Just so happens that one piece of him, the shoulder, was swallowed by one of the gods by accident, so they replaced that with an ivory shoulder, as if to say, sorry, Pelops. Pelops then goes on with his life. He takes off for an area of the world, goes to this land called Pisa. And at that point, he finds a young princess that he catches his eye, Hippodamia. He wants to try to find a way to get this princess, but it turns out that the father of the princess will only give her away in marriage to someone who can beat him in a chariot race. So Pelops sidles up to this man Myrtilus, who is one of the helpers of the king named Oinomaus, and tricks Myrtilus, says to Myrtilus, if you can only help me and replace the cotter pins of the axle that are holding the wheels of the king's chariot on with wax, then I'll be very good to you and you can have great gifts from me. Well, Myrtilus goes ahead and does this, and when Oinomaus and Pelops have their chariot race to determine if Pelops can can take this daughter Hippodamia in marriage, of course the wax melts and the cotter pins fall out and the wheels fall off. Oinomaus goes head over heels and loses the race. At that point, Pelops now gets to win Hippodamia. He betrays Myrtilus, doesn't give him any of the things he promised, takes the kingdom and renames it Peloponnesia. And this is indeed where the name Peloponnesian comes from, as the mythic background gives us a story connected to where the name comes. So now that he's won, he's got his kingdom, he's got his girl, he has some children, Thyestes and Atreus. Nearby, there's a kingdom of Mycenae, and at that point, there's a king there that dies, and there's an oracle that a son of Pelops is going to take over the kingdom. They then figure that, well, the son of Pelops, we should go with the oldest son, so this should really belong to Atreus, who's older than Thyestes. But Thyestes proposes and says, you know, we're always talking about how the oldest son is supposed to be getting the background here, but why don't we just have a different kind of contest that at least gives me a chance? And Thyestes then proposes that whoever can produce the nicest sheep should be the one that takes the kingdom. Well, Atreus thinks this contest is just fine because he himself has taken a sheep and he knows it's beautiful. It's a golden sheep. It's something that he knows he's got a kind of ace in the hole. He's definitely going to win this contest. This is one that he had promised to give to Artemis but kept for himself. So he says, sure, Thyestes, let's see who can produce the nicest sheep. Next morning comes around, and guess what? Thyestes has this golden sheep. Atreus can't find his. At which point Atreus smells foul, something's happened. Thyestes, where did you get this thing? And Thyestes kind of fudges the question. Well, Thyestes had taken up with Atreus' own wife, Aerope, and Aerope had helped him sneak away the sheep from Atreus so Thyestes could produce it. So now Thyestes has won the contest. He should be the one that takes over as king of Mycenae. But Atreus enters in and says, wait a minute, I smell something's gone wrong here. Let me propose another contest. If the sun should rise in the west tomorrow, then I should be the rightful king of Mycenae. Thyestes thinks this is ridiculous. This could never happen, so he goes ahead and agrees to that. Well, Zeus, it just so happens, overhears what's going on, thinks Atreus should get the kingdom, so Zeus does indeed make the sun come up in the west. When it does, it's obvious that Atreus should have this kingdom. He goes and takes it. Thyestes then slinks away. Not the end of the story. Atreus finds out that Thyestes and his wife Aerope have been having this affair. So he's not only upset that Thyestes had stolen his golden sheep through Aerope as an intermediary, but he's also livid with his own brother for having an affair with his wife. So he invites Thyestes to dinner. Now, if someone in this family invites you to dinner, you should be careful. And indeed, that's what's happening here. When Atreus invites Thyestes to dinner, he carves up Thyestes' own sons, turns them into a stew, and Thyestes, unlike the gods, goes ahead and eats. Thyestes then devours his own son by accident in a cannibalistic stew that his own brother made for him, feeding his children to him. Ugh, poor Thyestes. Thyestes at that point runs away screaming mad to Delphi. He tries to figure out a way, how can I get revenge against my brother? Delphi at that point tells him the only way you'll be able to get revenge against your daughter or against your brother is if you have a child by your own daughter. At which point Thyestes thinks, oh my God, Delphi, this is an awful kind of omen to give me. What a terrible thing to say. He goes and goes away, sets up a campsite, gets very drunk around a campfire. But just so happens that a young girl stumbles past, young enough to be Thyestes' own daughter. He's so drunk he doesn't realize what's happening. He has sex with the girl, not realizing who it is. It's Pelopia, his own daughter. So he has sex with his own daughter. He then stumbles away the next day, leaving behind in his drunken stumbling, his hangover the next day, leaving behind his own familial sword. At that point, the poor young girl Pelopia, who's now been made pregnant in this, in being forced, having been forced upon by her own father, finds the sword there, takes that with her, and is wandering around. At that point, Atreus sees this beautiful young woman wandering around. Just so happens that 9 months later, she gives birth to a little child. At that point, Atreus thinks, well, this must have been my child. The child is Aegisthus. Yes, indeed, poor Aegisthus is the product of incest, rivalry, family betrayal, all the worst possible, cannibalism, all of this leads up to this figure, Aegisthus. He's one that we get to know very well in this story. Poor Aegisthus. I mean, talk about a messed up family background. Some of us can bemoan our own, but nothing like Aegisthus is. Now, as time goes by, Atreus keeps looking for Thyestes. He wants to make sure that this revenge against his brother is complete and realizes that Thyestes must be pretty upset with him at this point. He then sends Agamemnon, his own son, and Menelaus, his other son. See here, Atreus has given birth in the meantime to Agamemnon and Menelaus. They've grown up along with Aegisthus as if they're all in the same family. He sends Menelaus and Agamemnon off to Delphi to figure out what they're supposed to do to find Thyestes. As they get there, they actually see him. Thyestes is hanging around Delphi trying to figure out what to do. Agamemnon and Menelaus drag him back home. At that point, we have Atreus, who takes his other son, Aegisthus, and says, Thyestes, we will now kill you. My own brother Thyestes, we will now kill you. Aegisthus, here, take the family sword and go off and kill this awful miscreant Thyestes. At that point, Aegisthus drags Thyestes away. He takes the sword and is about to kill him. At that point, Thyestes recognizes the sword. Oh my gosh, where did you get that? That's my own sword. And he just says, no, it's mine. At that point, they call away for Aegisthus' mother to figure out what's the deal with the sword. At that point, poor Pelopia comes back. She hears the full story. You, Thyestes, you're my father and you're my own son's. The whole family awfulness comes back. The father and husband, Thyestes, of Pelopia is facing her. She's obviously a little upset. She takes her own life with the sword. Aegisthus and Thyestes are trying to figure out what's happening. They've got a bloody sword now right next to them. They realize what's happened and they reunite as father and son. And Aegisthus goes back and says to Atreus, yes, I've killed Thyestes and here's blood on the sword to prove it. At that point, Atreus thinks all is done and all is well and is getting ready to wash out the stain in the family, clean up and purify from all this nastiness that goes on. And the reunited Aegisthus and Thyestes return, and during the rejoicing of purification that Atreus is doing, they come in and kill Atreus. Now, with Atreus gone away, Thyestes can take over the throne. Aegisthus sits at his right hand. Menelaus and Agamemnon are off in their own, they get banished and they're off on their own. At that point in their banishment, link up with Helen and Clytemnestra, and then come back later to take over the kingdom from Thyestes and Aegisthus. When Menelaus and Agamemnon take it over, then Agamemnon now becomes the true king of the house of Atreus. He owns the palace at Mycenae Argos and becomes the obvious and now rightful and clear and concise ruler of this whole wonderful kingdom. Well, it just so happens that there is this Aegisthus figure out there, and he's orbiting around in the background in Agamemnon's tale, waiting to find a moment where he can come to roost. The awfulness of this family in the house of Atreus leads to all kinds of terrible things. These failed relationships have horrific consequences, not least all the things we're learning about in the Oresteia and the horrible things that happened to them. The Trojan War itself emerges out of the nasty dynamics of this family. Helen and Menelaus and Agamemnon and his relationship with his brother. At this home in Argos Mycenae, the next story in this heartwarming tale of this family is going to lead us right into the core of the story of Aeschylus's Oresteia, beginning with the Agamemnon.